Hi Vue Toronto, my name is Lachlan Miller and I'm here to talk to you about the state of Vue testing. Just a quick introduction to let you know a little bit about myself. My name is Lachlan and I've been contributing to Vue Test Utils since we started building it in 2017. And I've also been the primary maintainer since about 2019. I'm also the primary maintainer on a number of other libraries such as Vue Jest, which is a library that lets you use Vue components in your Jest tests. I'm also the author of the book Vue Testing Handbook, something you've probably come across if you've ever tried to write a test for your Vue components. You can find my social links at the bottom, and if you'd like to grab a copy of these slides to follow along at home, there's going to be a link at the bottom that you can grab as well. Let's take a quick look at the agenda today. We're going to first talk about the state of Vue Test Utils, how it works with Vue 3, and how you can upgrade. We're then going to look at some of the changes and improvements. We're going to then move on to our philosophy behind Vue Test Utils and take a look at some of the resources out there to let you write better tests. So let's take a look at the current state of Vue testing. For those of you who haven't used it before, we're going to be looking at Vue Test Utils, which is the official library for testing Vue components. This one uses a kind of mount API or wrapper API. You can see over here on the right a very typical Vue component test. We're going to use mount to mount our component. We then use a number of useful methods, for example, trigger and find, which is provided by Vue Test Utils to allow you to interact with your components. We can then use something like the HTML method to make an assertion against the DOM to make sure everything is rendering correctly. We take this API for granted, so let's take a quick look at where this API came from, how it was designed, and some of the problems it's kind of introduced, and then how we've tried to fix and improve these problems. So prior to Vue Test Utils, there was a different library which was born under the name Avoriaz, and the idea here was to create Enzyme for Vue. Enzyme being a very popular React testing library at the time, and this was back in around early 2017. 1 year prior, Vue 2 had just come out, but the testing options were kind of not there yet. There was no sort of official way to test Vue components, and this was something the community was looking for. As such, someone took some initiative. A guy called Ed created the Avoriaz testing library, and it was basically a clone of Enzyme for Vue. And this was early 2017. After a few months, it was clear this was a pretty popular library, and we needed to have something a bit more official, and this is when Vue Test Utils was born. It was built on top of Avoriaz with a very similar API. Everything seemed great. What could go wrong? Basically, since day one, there's been this kind of problem or this conflicting idea. Vue is asynchronous. Things are not necessarily updated immediately. It's asynchronous in the fact that it will batch any updates to the DOM and then apply them after what's called a next tick is called. On the other hand, test runners are not asynchronous. They are synchronous, which means sometimes you get unexpected results when you're writing your tests. Let's take a look at a really common problem you've probably encountered if you've ever tried to write a Vue component test. Over here on the right, we have a component. It has a button which you can click on, and that's going to toggle the show variable, in this case from false to true. When show becomes true, we'd like to render a message that says hello. So the test we're going to write here is we're going to click on the button, change the value to true, and then assert that hello is rendered in the DOM. You can see here that we're doing a quick finding the button and simulating a trigger event, or simulating a click by calling trigger with the click argument. We're then making an assertion, and you would expect this to pass. However, this doesn't pass, which is very unintuitive and quite surprising when you first pick up Vue component testing. The reason this is not going to pass is because Vue is asynchronous, and it's not guaranteed that the DOM has been updated when this assertion runs. So what do we do and how did we solve this problem? Vue exposes an API called wrapper.vm.nextTick, and this is going to allow us to ensure that the DOM has been updated before we run any of our assertions. Let's take a look at the updated test. We're doing the exact same thing by mounting our component. We're then finding the button and triggering a click event. And this time we're saying await wrapper.vm.nextTick. And what this is going to do is ensure that Vue has correctly updated the DOM before the assertion runs. We then await for next tick, and our assertion runs and everything is working as expected. This does work great in practice, however, it's very unintuitive and it's a lot of extra overhead. You have to think, am I going to update the DOM? And if you are, you have to call await.wrapper.vm.nextTick, which is not something you really want to be doing. You just want to be focused on what your test does and how it works. So let's see an improvement we've made recently to Vue Test Utils, both for Vue 3 and Vue 2, that's going to let you write more concise tests. You can see over here on the right we have two tests, one showing the old API and one showing the new Shorthand API. So traditionally you would do wrapper.find button and then trigger a click event. You would then call await wrapper.vm.nextTick. This has now been combined into one more concise syntax. All you need to do is say await wrapper.find and trigger the event you'd like to trigger here. What this is going to do is allow you to await for next tick without explicitly awaiting for next tick. So it's just going to save you a little bit of typing. What's happening here is trigger is going to return a reference to next tick. So when you await for trigger, it's going to then await for next tick as well. You're able to call await on anything that would update the DOM. For example, the set props, set data, or trigger method in Vue Test Utils. So this is one improvement we've made to the new version of Vue Test Utils for Vue 3, and this has also been backported to Vue Test Utils for Vue 2. So you're able to start using this new improvement right now. There's one other significant improvement or change I'd like to talk about, and that is related to the idea of create local view. To understand what create local view does and why it was necessary, we have to take a look at how Vue handles or Vue 2 handles plugins. Over here on the right, you can see we're creating a test using a component that requires a Vuex store. So in our store.js file, we're saying vue.use and we're installing the Vuex plugin. We're then creating a new instance of the store. We then go ahead and pass the store into our mount component or our mounting options. And this is fine in practice. However, it turns out when you're using a plugin in Vue 2, it's going to globally mutate the Vue instance. So when you call that vue.use Vuex line, it's going to ensure Vuex is installed not only for the test you're writing, but it's going to install it for every test that you've written. And this is not always going to be ideal. When you write a unit test, you'd like to isolate everything and ensure that one test behavior is not going to have an impact on any of your other tests, because this can lead to very subtle bugs. The way this was solved was by introducing a create local view function in Vue Test Utils. You can see here I'm importing create local view from Vue Test Utils, and then we're creating a local view before we mount our component, and then we're passing the local view into our mounting options. And what this is going to do is create a localized view, and when we do any installation, for example Vuex, we're going to install it on our local view, and it's not going to have any impact on any of our other tests. We've successfully isolated our Vue instance and our global mutation is no longer a problem. While this does work quite well in practice, again, it's very similar to the next tick problem. It's a lot of extra overhead and it's not very intuitive. So this is really not ideal. However, this is kind of the only way that we could solve this in Vue Test Utils for Vue 2 because of the nature of Vue globally mutating the Vue constructor when you install plugins. So this is just something we had to live with. This is not only a problem for Vue Test Utils, but a number of other applications as well, or other plugins in Vue. So the way plugins now work in Vue 3 has changed a little bit. Let's take a look at that and see the implications for Vue Test Utils. Over here on the left, you can see the traditional way of installing a Vuex plugin for Vue. The first thing you do is call vue.use and pass it in Vuex. So you install the plugin, and then you go ahead and create the new store and pass it to the Vue component or the Vue application. This has actually been reversed in Vue 3, and the reason this has been reversed is because the idea is you're installing a plugin for a specific Vue application, not globally. You can see over here we're creating our application first, and then we go ahead and say vue.use and pass in our store. So we install the plugin after we've created the application. And this is a much better workflow. It ensures there's no global mutation. And you can see here, I'm able to create a second application, and this one is not going to have Vuex installed. So the second application is not going to be impacted by a side effect of the first application installing Vuex. And this is an improvement that's been made in Vue Core. This is not something we've changed in Vue Test Utils. Let's take a look at how this does impact Vue Test Utils. Because there's no need to use create local view anymore, because the global mutation is no longer a problem, the way you now install plugins is using a new global mounting option. It's called global because it's going to globally install it for all the components in this particular application. So in this example, I'm using the global mounting option, and I'm passing in the plugins mounting option, and I'm passing in a store here. What this is going to do is automatically install this store on my component for this particular test, but it's not going to have any side effects or mutate any other components. So this is definitely a big improvement. There's no need for local view anymore. All you need to do is use the global mounting option and pass in your Vuex store or your router to plugins. This works the same for anything that you would globally install. For example, plugins, components, or directives. All you need to do is pass them to the global mounting option, and that's going to work just fine. A much cleaner API than using create local view. There is some other improvements to the global mounting option as well. It now contains the old APIs, mocks, and stubs. The reason these are now inside of the global mounting option is because it better reflects what they do. If you're mocking something global, for example, a Vuex store or a Vue router, or you're stubbing out a component, it's not just going to apply to the one component that you're mounting, it's going to apply to all the components inside of that component as well, the entire component hierarchy. And by putting it in the global mounting option, it makes this behavior more clear and easy to understand. So now that we've seen some of the significant changes, there are some other smaller trivial changes. You can learn all about those in the migration guide available in our documentation. So definitely go ahead and check that one out. Now that we've talked about some of the changes, let's look at some of the new and exciting features. The one I'm most excited for is the new plugins feature. And what this is going to allow you to do is extend the wrapper and add your own methods and properties. Over the years, many people have requested their favorite features be added to Vue Test Utils. However, it's not scalable to go ahead and add everyone's favorite feature. But in response to this, we've made it much easier to go ahead and add your own features to wrapper and extend Vue Test Utils to make your tests more expressive and more opinionated. Let's see a very simple example of this on the right. Some people like to use wrapper.vm.$L in their tests, and because this is a frequent use case, you might like to create an alias using wrapper.L to save yourself a few keystrokes. Let's see how you can do this using the new plugins architecture. All you need to do is create a function that returns or receives wrapper as the first argument, and everything you return from this is going to be added to your wrapper throughout your Vue tests. So for example, in this case, I'm creating a new L attribute, and that's just going to be an alias to wrapper.vm.L. The next thing you need to do is install it by calling config.plugins.vuewrapper.install and install your plugin, and then you can go ahead and use it in your tests. So this is going to allow you to extend Vue Test Utils and make your tests more expressive and allow you to write tests how you would like to write them. Let's see a more realistic and useful plugin. Over here, I'm seeing showing something that I find myself doing often a lot. I often find myself doing wrapper.find and passing in very specific selectors, for example, a data test ID selector, or a label selector, or a placeholder selector. This is quite verbose and hard to read. What I can now do is write my own extension methods, for example, find by test ID, find by label, or find by placeholder, and I think this makes my tests much more expressive. Let's take a look at a more concrete implementation of one of these methods. In this example, I've implemented my find by test ID plugin. It's very simple, it's only around 15 lines of code. You can see it over there on the right. I'm not going to go extremely into detail with this particular example, but you can go ahead and copy this one and try it out yourself, or even try writing your own plugins and see what you can come up with. I'm really excited to see the different things that people come up with, and I wouldn't be surprised if we could soon see a thriving community of Vue Test Utils plugins. The final improvement we've made is to try and make the documentation a bit more useful. So originally the Vue Test Utils docs was very focused on configuration, how to set up Vue Test Utils for different libraries or different test runners. This was back in the day when the Vue CLI was not nearly as mature as it is. However, nowadays the Vue CLI is very mature, everything pretty much works out of the box, so there's much less need to document all the different configuration options for Vue Test Utils. Instead, the documentation has been completely rewritten, and we're now much more focused on how to test and why to test, as opposed to configuring Vue Test Utils. And I think this is a much better way for people to learn about Vue testing and Vue Test Utils and best practices in general. So if you're new to Vue testing, or you'd like to learn more about the changes to Vue Test Utils, you could go ahead and check out the documentation here as well. Now that we've covered some of the changes to Vue Test Utils and some of the improvements, let's take a little bit of a step back and take a look at this philosophy behind Vue Test Utils. So now Vue Test Utils is a few years old, it's much more stable, and this is something we're definitely committed to. The API, I don't expect to have any significant changes in the future, and if there are improvements that need to be made, we are following the RFC process the same as the rest of the Vue core libraries. So if you'd like to suggest a change, you can use the RFC process, and everyone can have input, and we can work together to build the best Vue testing library that we can. Vue Test Utils is also unopinionated. The reason we like to stay unopinionated is so you can be opinionated in your own tests. And this is going to allow people to write different tests depending on their different styles or their own philosophy. Another benefit to being unopinionated is we can let people take Vue Test Utils, extend it, and build their own testing libraries that are more opinionated and do encourage certain practices. So what we're going to do now is take a look at two other libraries that are built on top of Vue Test Utils and take a look at some of the benefits they might give you when you're testing your Vue applications. The first one we're going to look at is Testing Library. So Testing Library is actually a large family of testing libraries for different frameworks. They have React and Vue integration, along with many other ones. And it's a bit different to Vue Test Utils in that it is user-centric. What I mean by this is instead of being like Vue Test Utils, which is very component-centric, very focused on the component and how the component works, Vue Testing Library is much more focused on what the user does. You can see here we have a getByRole method, and this is ideally simulating what a user would do. For example, if a user is using a screen reader, they would use getByRole to find a button that does a specific behavior. They would then trigger an event. So instead of having the component with the method, it's more focused on the method, and the component is just part of the whole user workflow. Another benefit of Testing Library is it's more opinionated, so there's more backup and more specific ways to do things. So if you're not sure on a specific way to test your component, Testing Library probably has an opinion, and they'll tell you how you should be doing things and why you should be doing things that way. Finally, it's accessible by default. You can see here, it really encourages you to use things like a getByRole selector. And accessibility is really important. If you take a look at the new Vue 3 documentation, there's an entire section on accessibility. So I think that any library that encourages you to be accessible is a good one in my books. So this is one of the things I really like about Testing Library. The Vue integration is maintained by my friend Adria Fonsuberta, who is also working on Vue Test Utils. So he's very far across both Testing Library and across Test Utils and Vue in general. So this is definitely a library I think very highly of, and I would encourage you to check it out as well. You can find a link in the slides here to the GitHub repository, which has a lot of documentation and instructions on getting started. And they already have a temporary or experimental Vue 3 support, so you can try it out with both Vue 2 and Vue 3. The next integration or library I like to look at is Cypress Vue's plugin. So Cypress is an end-to-end test runner focused on the full stack, so the backend and the front end. It encourages you to test your entire application in an actual real browser like a user would test it, which is obviously a good thing. And Cypress has a very vibrant community of plugins as well. You can see here I'm talking about the Cypress Vue plugin. And what this will allow you to do is run your tests in a browser, and you can actually see everything. So this is really useful for debugging. It's definitely more intuitive to try and debug a Vue UI component when you can actually see what is going on in the browser. The library is still quite young. It's only been around, or Cypress itself has been around for a very long time. That's a very mature product. But the Vue integration is something that's quite new. However, I tried it out and it seems really good. So I would really encourage you to check it out as well if you're more of a visual person and you like to see things in a real browser. The Vue integration is maintained by Jessica Sachs, who is also a primary maintainer of Vue Test Utils. So she's well across both Vue Test Utils and Cypress testing. So I have a lot of confidence in this library, and I do expect this to become more popular in the coming months and years. There's a really good YouTube talk about this from a previous conference by Jess, demonstrating the library, talking about how it works and some of the benefits. So I would encourage you to check that presentation out as well. So now that you've seen all the different tools that are available, you're probably wondering which one should I use. You can see over here on the right, I have the Vue testing pyramid, starting with Cypress at the top, which is a much more fully featured test runner and test setup, much more opinionated. And at the bottom, we have Vue Test Utils, which is a much less opinionated library, and it's not going to have as much support out of the box. So if you like something more opinionated and batteries built in, you might like to check out Cypress or Testing Library. If you like to do things yourself and have maximum flexibility, Test Utils might be a better candidate for your project. It's really down to personal preference, and I would encourage you to try them all out to see which one you like best. So where to next? If you'd like to learn more about testing with Vue Test Utils, you can obviously check out the official documentation as I mentioned earlier. It has some simple guides and quick start guide so you can get going as fast as possible. And it also has the API reference. So this is going to tell you all the different things that Vue Test Utils can do, as well as steps to upgrade from the previous version with Vue 2 to the new version with Vue 3. There's also a book called the Vue Testing Handbook that I mentioned earlier. I did write this with the help of many contributors to who I'm very thankful. It's working for both Vue 2 and Vue 3, so you can use it whichever library you are currently using for your applications. And there's a link here in the slides. Finally, I uploaded some free lectures to YouTube about Vue Test Utils for Vue 3. So if you prefer video content, you can check those ones out as well. There's a link there. And finally, I have to take this opportunity to talk about my own content. I have a website called Vue.js course. It has a single course about Vue, TypeScript, and the composition API. We write tests for everything using Vue Test Utils. So this is paid content, of course. If you would like to check that one out though, there is a half price code there, Vue Toronto 25 off. So go ahead and check that one out as well. I would really appreciate that. This does bring me to the end of my presentation of the state of Vue testing. Thank you for your attention, and I'm going to hang around and I look forward to talking to you about any questions you have about Vue testing, upgrading, or anything else related to Vue or testing at all.